Hi everyone, I hope you are all well. It's Sunday morning again. It's quite a nice cool morning. Weirdly, we're going to have sort of like a mini heat wave tomorrow where it's suddenly going to clump from about 20 degrees to 27, so that'll be fun. Hot air coming up from France. Might have to sit out in the garden a bit tomorrow. I don't know. What have I been up to? Working, of course, and finally got the garden under control because I haven't told you guys, but for the past 6 months I've had Hedgehog living in my garden, and she's still there and still, you know, feeding her and everything. But I haven't touched the garden because I'm kind of fearful that she'll get afraid and go away or something, you know, so I've kept it as is, and it got really bad, guys. So on Friday my mum and dad actually came over to help me do stuff with the front garden, and then we just ended up going to the back garden and we completely ripped out all of the like some rotten wood, knocked off parts of my tree, you know, branches, cut the grass. It looks really, really good. So a big transformation in my house, as it were. Well, outside my house, because obviously it's my garden. So got that done on Friday, which is great. I have been counting down the days until Troubled Blood. It's on Tuesday, and I'm so excited. I've got the day off work. I'm having it delivered to my house because at the time of pre-ordering, COVID just kicked off, so I have ordered it online instead of going into store. So I don't know what time on Tuesday I'm going to get it, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed it'll arrive in the morning and not like 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the evening or something like that, especially since I booked the day off work to be able to read it. So I'm super excited for that, and tonight is the last episode of Lethal White. I have also just filmed my announcement video, which actually I'm uploading right now before, you know, obviously while I'm filming this one, just to save myself some time because my broadband is so rubbish. So you'll get my announcement video before this one, and I hope you like the pics that I have. Yeah, you have to let me know what you think of that. But anyway, let's move on to the book I have been reading this week, the review of it, and that is Katherine Swynford, The Story of John of Gaunt and His Scandalous Duchess by Alison Weir. So the whole story of how I picked up this book is that I didn't have a connection to Catherine, as it were. I didn't have a thing of, you know, like I do with the Tudors, where I love the Tudor period, so I will pick up any book about the Tudor period and read it. It was what I was is that I was looking for a biography of Matilda, a biography which I've come to the conclusion doesn't really exist. Matilda being the daughter of Henry I, because her story is like crazy, ridiculously crazy, and I'd love to read a book about her, and I was hunting for this book, can't find it anywhere. I don't think one actually exists, which is really sad because of her life was just mental. And so in my hunt for looking around for books on Matilda, it led me to Katherine Swynford, because it in a way Matilda was long before Catherine, but because it was, you know, older periods of history, I was kind of looking in those sections of history bookshelves in bookstores, and I came across this one. So Katherine Swynford, crazily, if it wasn't for this woman, we would not have the royal families that we have around the world today. She's that important. It's mental. And it's because she was the mistress of John of Gaunt. Isn't it crazy that we can pinpoint royal families from around the globe to be related to this one woman? I saw that on the back of the book and I was like, really? She's that important? But I couldn't tell you her name. I couldn't tell you her connection until I read this book properly. And I actually had to write down details as I was reading this book in order to get the family tree right, because it is crazy. So let me break this down for you. So John of Gaunt was the Duke of Lancaster, and he was the third child of King Edward III. Okay, so he's a prince straight off, but obviously just says that you have now with like William and Kate and such, they are, he's a prince, but he's also a duke, and she is a duchess. So throughout this book, they're referred to as Duke and Duchess. And he actually didn't marry Catherine until it was his third marriage, and they were only married for 3 years, the last 3 years of his life, when he was, he died in his mid to late 50s, which at that time was quite old. So, you know, it wasn't too bad. But in comparison, if you think about it, that it was only the last few years of his life, you know, it was a very short-lived marriage and everything. And she actually died 4 years after him. They were about 10 years difference between them. She was 10 years, about 10 years younger, and she outlived him by 4 years. So that's kind of thing. And Catherine actually began as the daughter of a courtier who kind of got integrated into the household, you know, working as like a lady in waiting to John's first wife, Blanche. Okay, so John is the prince, you know, the third child of King Edward III. Catherine is a lady in waiting, and this is John's first wife, Blanche. Now, this is where it gets a bit confusing, because when you're reading this book, there are lots of people in same and next generations who all share the same name. Thus, I had to write it down. So, like, you had this situation where John's first wife, Blanche, and Catherine became really good friends, so much so that Catherine had a daughter also called Blanche, whose godparents were John and Blanche. Do you see what I mean? It gets a bit confusing. Basically, Catherine then became kind of the governess to John and Blanche's two daughters. And when that happened, a love affair started happening, which ended up spanning nearly 30 years between John and Catherine. They had 4 children during the course of that time before their marriage, who were deemed bastards at the time of their birth, and obviously through their life, until they got married right near the end of their lives, and then they were legitimized. Okay, so John married Blanche and had 2 children. He married Constance, and I think they had a couple of children. And then Catherine, he'd already fathered 4 children with. So there were quite a few children in this you know, situation. But Catherine was pretty much scandalized because of this love affair. It was something that everybody knew, but it was kind of hushed up. But then, because of political situations, it had to be exposed, which meant her children were deemed bastards and all this stuff. She had married, as I said, because she had a daughter called Blanche, who John and Blanche were godparents to. Before the love affair started, she actually had a couple of children with her first husband. He then died. He was a knight. He died. And then from that point on, she was pretty much on her own, and she had subsequent 4 children. So between John and Catherine, she had 6 children in total. He had, before, obviously, the 4 that he had with Catherine, he had about 4 himself. So there's about 10 children here in the mix. And obviously they all married and they had various children and so on and so forth. So much so I'm referring to my notepad because this is where I need to get my head around. So John's first son with his first wife, Blanche, turned out to be King Henry IV, and so his second grandson was King Henry V. Okay, so because of that line, because of Henry IV and his situation and all that law, Henry IV establishes the House of Lancaster, and through John's older brother Lionel, through his various things down, he establishes the House of York, and the House of Lancaster and the House of York had some problems, so much so they created the War of the Roses. So straight away, because John had a older brother called Lionel, that's where the War of the Roses starts, from the same family. Now here's where it gets even further, with the family tree. So Catherine, as I said, was John's third wife and his mistress for 30 years. She was not from royalty, she was from a courtier family. Her sister married the poet and writer Geoffrey Chaucer, the author of the Canterbury Tales. And it is believed, but it's not actually proven, that one or more of his stories is actually about Catherine, which this book goes over and speculates. Now, out of the children that John and Catherine had together, so out of their 4 children, their first child, who was also called John, we'll call him John Jr. for this explanation. So John Jr. actually establishes the House of the Stuarts and the House of the Tudors, because John's 4th child, Joan, married James I of Scotland, who, after Elizabeth I died, he was named heir, and he's James I of England and 6th of Scotland, but he then came to England to take the throne, and then the whole thing about, because people didn't like him being there, the gunpowder plot happened with Guy Fawkes, and there we go. So that he is that James. So so their 4th child, Joan, married James, who is the first member of the House of Stuarts, right? And John's great grandson, so John Jr.'s great grandson was, no, I'm getting myself confused now. My God, this is ridiculous. Oh, no, wait. Yes, that is right. Yes, sorry. I'm getting my brain muddled up. So John's great grandson, John Jr.'s great grandson, was King Henry VII of the House of Tudor. And John of Gaunt and Catherine's 3rd child, Joan, via her 2nd marriage, became the great-grandmother of Elizabeth of York, who married King Henry VII, who was the first member of the House of the Tudors. See, I even wrote it down and I got confused. It is crazy. It's because of these 2 people, Catherine and John of Gaunt, that we have the royal family line that we have for the rest of the monarchy. And obviously they had children, they married to various royal families around the world. We wouldn't have the royal monarchy throughout the world if it wasn't for these 2 people, basically. And so it is really, really, really confusing. And thankfully, at the back, there are some brilliant, some absolutely brilliant family trees. So as you can see here, as I said, so we have Catherine and John up there, and then we have the marriage of the Stuart family through Joan. So so John and Catherine had their first son, John, who had a child called Joan, who married into the House of Stuart, and through their grandson John, there was marriage between Margaret Beaufort and Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond, which produced Henry VII, who produced the House of Tudor. So there we go. So that's I should have just shown that, and rather than refer to my notes and made a complete confusion out of something I could have done simply there. But they also have the Chaucer family to show how Geoffrey Chaucer and Catherine are connected. The Swynford family to show how Catherine is established in the line. Then you've got the House of Lancaster, as I said, which came through, through Henry IV, through John's line. And then we've got Edward III's England and how John of Gaunt is his second child. So it is like, it's really confusing. It is really confusing. And so sometimes I did feel confused reading this book, and that's not Alison's fault. It's me trying to get my head around all of these people of the exact same name in multiple generations, and just trying to get the connections right, and which Blanche is alive, which Blanche is dead, that kind of thing, which Joan is alive, which Joan is dead, because it's that confusing. But my God, it's bizarre, it's crazy. But if it wasn't for those connections, we would not have the monarchy that we have today. So there you go. So if you love the monarchy, you have to respect Katherine Swynford for her love affair with John of Gaunt that lasted 30 years, that produced those children, that meant that it was possible. So about this book specifically, I've spent about 16 minutes trying to explain the line and Catherine and her life and everything. So Alison has written this book really beautifully, actually. It's very hard. I was going to do a reading, but I'm not now because I'm only 16 minutes in. I'm only just starting on the actual book, so I don't want to drag this out any longer than it needs to be. But Alison has it's a very hard thing to do, because the further you go back, obviously the less documents there are, and like even with Catherine's date of birth, we don't know when her date of birth is. There is no record that has survived of it. But what she's done is that she refers to throughout this book biographies that have previously been done on Catherine, either around the time when she was alive, or after, obviously, and more contemporary accounts of her, and saw what they had to say. And there are things like, to be able to establish her year of birth, there are references and like poems or documents, some documents, other documents, and references on a tomb of I think it might be of John, actually, that kind of indicates when it could be, but we don't know exactly when it is. So she has a lot of things that she's had to juggle and play with and question and speculate, which obviously usually as a biographer you don't want them to speculate. You want them to give fact, but when you don't have the documents or anything to establish those facts, you have to speculate. And I do love the fact that she refers to previous biographers and said, look, this is what they have said, this is what proof, if we've got proof it has, this is what I think. Really love her for that. I always like how Alison, she's academic, but she doesn't push it to the point where it gets really dry and quite boring or dull. She gets the balance right, and I really liked that. I liked following Catherine through her scandals, and I loved Catherine as a person. She was still more of an isolated figure. And what I mean by that is that she is... Last week, when I read Sophia, I felt like Sophia was right here next to me. I could see her, I could feel her energy, I knew her personality. With this one, it kind of feels like Catherine is just, she's kind of over there still. She's a figure, I can see her, I can understand her, I can understand things that she's done, but I don't know her as a person. But then the thing is that the further back your subjects are in history, the less of a connection you're going to have. And that's not necessarily issue, with what I've got. My connection to Catherine is not entirely therefore Alison's fault in a way, because the way she's written her, it is just the lack of information. But for what she had to play with, I think Alison did a really good job. I think I would need to reread this though, just so now that I understand and got my, my line right and everything. I think that, yeah, you know what has confused me? I've just realised what a ball has just dropped in my head from earlier, where I said how I was thinking James the First, because it was James the Sixth was the one who came over to Tudor line, but it's James the First who their daughter married, and there's 5 Jameses in between that gap. I think that's what it is. As soon as I hear James the First, being from England, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, so it's James the Sixth of Scotland and the First of England. It's not, it's the First of Scotland. And it's things like that my brain was finding it quite hard to process. But now that I got to the end of this book and I understand, or at least it's a little bit clearer now, the connections and which Blanche is which Blanche, which Joan is which Joan kind of thing, I think it'd be easier reading it a second time round. But for initial read, it is quite tough just because of those various connections. But again, that's not Alison's fault that so many people had the exact same name in the same generation and they all had children with the same names. It was a tough read. I'm not going to deny that. For what she had to work with, I think Alison did well. But then at the same time, yeah, it was quite tough. I can't say that I really loved it. I can just say for what it was, for a biography book about a woman who I never knew, who I know quite a bit about her now and everything. It was good. It was all right, but it wasn't amazing. It's tough going. It's only like 280 pages, but it's tough going, or at least I felt it was tough going. I thought the time period she spoke about really, yeah, quite beautifully. I enjoyed learning about, because John was a military man, and I learned a load of stuff about the military of that time and the things that John got caught up with. And there was this big situation near the end of the book. He had a military disaster situation happened and the impact that would make, and I would have had no clue what that would have meant until I read this book. So I did learn things about Katherine, about John, about military and stuff like that. So I did learn things. It just wasn't great for me. So would I read this again? I think I would, now that I understand the family tree more. As I said, I give it another go but I'm glad I'd be having it with more understanding than I did the first time round. Would I read any more Alison's books? Well, yes, because I love Alison. Alison Weir is a really good historian. And yeah, this is actually my first book of hers that I've read where she was really limited with documents and such. And for what she did, I think she did pretty well. Would I recommend this book? If they were interested in the period and they had more of a understanding of the family tree and the connection, then yeah, I would. For someone going in it blind, I would, but I would recommend that. Not recommend, but I would warn them that it is pretty hard going in the various connections and all that lot, which I've said about 5 million times in this review, but it was confusing. But yeah, that's all I can think of to say about Katherine. You had a very interesting love affair, very interesting family tree, and my God, it's established monarchy all around the world to this day. But yeah, not a bad lady in history. So there we go. So that's Katherine Swynford. I hope you enjoyed that review. I know it was confusing and stuff like that, but then everything is her family tree is just crazy. I'm sorry, it's mental. But yeah, as I said, I'm already uploading my announcements for the books I'm going to be reading next. I hope you enjoy them. And Troubled Blood comes out on Tuesday. I'm so super excited. Only 2 days to go. And yeah, we'll see how that goes, and I'll be back with my thoughts on Troubled Blood as soon as I finish reading. Have you read this book? I'd love to know what you think. Leave me a comment in the comments box below, or give me a thumbs up, thumb down. Entirely up to you. I'll let you decide. And I'll see you later. Bye.